What would you do if your HOA threatened to bulldoze the backyard deck, where your family has celebrated every birthday for the last 20 years? Imagine opening your mail to see the words, "Remove non-compliant structure, 30 days stamped," in bold across an official letter. Not just a fine, not just a warning, an order to destroy the place where your kids blew out candles and your parents danced at their 50th anniversary. My name's Mark Johnson. I'm 54. And I've lived in Cedar Hills nearly half my life. I'm a high school history teacher, husband to Diane, father of 3. Our house isn't fancy, but it's ours. And out back stands the deck my brother and I built in 1999. We stained it by hand, hammered every nail, and sealed it with a coat of sweat and pride. Over the years, it's held cookouts, snowball fights, and more family photos than I can count. And according to our HOA president, Karen, it's illegal. Cedar Hills used to be neighborly. Barbecues, block parties, kids riding bikes till the streetlights came on. The HOA, back then, was little more than a committee to keep the pool chlorinated and hire a guy to mow the community entrance. But then Karen ran for president. She promised order and higher property values. At first, folks thought she was just organized. Turns out, she was power-hungry. Within months, we had rules about mailbox colors, curtain shades, even how tall our grass could grow, measured with a ruler. Then came her uniform decks, rule-only approved vinyl platforms, neutral tones, HOA licensed contractors. Wood was outdated. So when I opened that letter stapled to my deck railing, it read like a death sentence. Violation, notice structure, unapproved wooden deck, directive remove, within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. I sat down hard on the railing. $200 a day. For a deck older than half the neighborhood. My dad taught me history. But in that moment, I felt it. I was about to become part of it. At the next HOA meeting, I brought photos my brother and me hammering in '99. Diane, holding our newborn on that deck. My daughter's 16th birthday candles glowing against the boards. This deck isn't illegal, I said firmly. It predates your rules. It's safe, it's sound, and it's family. Karen leaned forward, lips pursed. Mr. Johnson, while we respect your memories, rules are rules. Cedar Hills must present a consistent image. Your deck does not conform. I raised my voice. This isn't about image. It's about lives lived. She smirked. Decision final. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. The fines began immediately. Week 1, deck violation, $1,400 accrued. Week 2, improper paint on shutters. Week 3, unauthorized grill equipment visible from street. It wasn't enforcement. It was punishment. So I grabbed a binder, stuffed every notice inside, and wrote in thick marker across the front, Deck Defense Exhibit A. Diane shook her head, sliding me a cup of coffee. Mark, you're turning into a one-man legal office. I looked up. No. I'm turning into a wall she won't knock down. Then neighbors started knocking. Mrs. Alvarez clutched a violation for her flower boxes. They were my late husband's pride. she whispered. The Thompsons showed me a warning about their treehouse. Karen says it's a safety hazard. Their little boy clung to his dad's leg, eyes wide. Even quiet old George admitted he'd been fined for unapproved lawn furniture, a rocking chair he'd had since his wife was alive. That night, folks gathered on my deck. Lanterns swayed overhead. Kids sprawled on the steps with popsicles. And neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, papers in hand. They can't bulldoze us all, I told them. But they can pick us off one by one unless we stand together. For the first time, I saw it, the fire in their eyes. Earl, my next door neighbor, raised his beer can. Then let's give her a fight she won't forget. And right there, on the deck, Karen wanted to erase. The battle for Cedar Hills began. The night after that backyard gathering, I sat out on the deck, staring at the boards my brother and I had nailed down over 20 years ago. The grain of the wood was worn smooth by footsteps, spills, and laughter. I ran my hand along a crack in the railing and thought, Karen thinks this is just lumber. She doesn't see the stories soaked into it. By sunrise, I had a plan. I printed out a simple petition across the top, bold as could be. We, the homeowners of Cedar Hills, call for the recall of HOA President Karen Miller for abuse of power, selective enforcement, and harassment. Diane read it over my shoulder while pouring coffee. Straightforward, she said. She won't like that. She doesn't have to like it, I muttered. She just has to face it. Our first stop was Earl's house. He signed so hard the pen nearly snapped. She fined me for my shed last week. Said the hinges weren't aesthetic. Hinges, count me in. Mrs. Alvarez added her name, tears glistening as she said, My flower boxes are all I have left of my husband. If she thinks I'm tearing them down, she can come try herself. Even George, who hadn't spoken above a mumble in years, put his name down. She wrote me up for my rocking chair. My Martha rocked babies in that chair. That woman can go to hell. Word spread. At the grocery store. People cornered me between aisles. At church. Hands tugged at my sleeve. You got the petition. Let me sign. At the diner. A couple slid me. Their violation letters folded inside the menu. By the end of the first week, we had 30 names. By the end of the second, 50. Karen noticed. Of course she did. She doubled down on fines. The Thompsons were ordered to dismantle their treehouse. Mrs. Alvarez got slapped with excessive plant density. I got 4 violations in 3 days. Deck rail, out of alignment. Unauthorized grilling activity. Improper hose storage. Non-regulation holiday lights. Never mind, it was July, and they were just string bulbs. I slid every one into the binder under a new tab. Retaliation. That binder was growing heavier than a textbook. But instead of scaring folks, Karen just added fuel to the fire. At the next neighborhood potluck, people waved their violation letters like flags. Evelyn, who usually kept quiet, raised her cane and said, She called my wind chimes a violation. My wind chimes. I've lived here 30 years. I'm not backing down. The cheer that followed nearly shook the picnic tables. By late August, we had 80 signatures, well past the required majority. We gathered on my deck again to celebrate. The boards groaned under the weight of half the block. But they held, like they always had. Diane passed around lemonade. Kids chased each other in the yard. And neighbors laughed like they'd forgotten what fear felt like. I stood at the top of the steps, petition in hand. We've done it. Karen doesn't run this neighborhood anymore. We do. And this deck stays. The cheer that rolled across Cedar Hills that night was louder than any gavel Karen ever banged. But deep down, I knew better. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And sure enough, the storm was still coming. Karen was never the type to fold her cards. The minute word of the recall spread, she came out swinging. The first shot landed in every mailbox on a Tuesday morning, a glossy, full-color flyer with stock photos of smiling families under identical beige decks. Across the top, in bold letters, "Protect Cedar Hills. Vote stability. Vote Karen." The back was worse. It accused agitators of spreading lies, undermining community values, and endangering property values. And there it was. Plain as day, my name in black ink. Diane read it at the kitchen table and chuckled bitterly. "Congratulations. Mark, you're officially public enemy number 1. I slid the flyer into the binder under a new tab propaganda. "Good," I said. "Means she's scared." But propaganda wasn't her only weapon. Within days, fines started flying again. Faster than junk mail. Earl's Grill, non-approved cooking equipment. Mrs. Alvarez's flower boxes, unauthorized construction. The Thompsons' treehouse, imminent safety hazard. And me, 3 citations in 48 hours. Deck surface uneven. Improper hose storage. Lawn chairs exceed quantity limits. I stacked them in the binder. Each page felt like fuel on the fire. Then came the Community Safety Report. Another packet stuffed into mailboxes. This time filled with grainy nighttime photos of people's homes. Cracked sidewalks. Chipped paint. Cluttered porches snapped from the shadows. At the bottom of each page, "This is what happens when agitators disrupt order." Neighbors were outraged. "She's sneaking around with a camera now, Mrs. Alvarez Fumed. That's stalking." I stood on my deck that night, looking over at Karen's house. Curtains twitched. I knew she was watching. But here's what she didn't understand. Every scare tactic only made us stronger. At church, the next Sunday, Earl stood up and waved one of Karen's reports in the air. If this is leadership, then I'd rather follow a garden gnome. The congregation burst into laughter, clapping loud enough to echo off the rafters. By early September, the petition was officially certified. The recall election was set. We gathered again on my deck. Lanterns strung along the railing. The wood under our feet groaned, but held just like us. Kids played tag in the yard. Laughter ringing out against the tension hanging over Cedar Hills. I raised the petition high. We've all been fined, threatened, harassed, but here we are, together. Karen's days of ruling with a gavel are numbered. The crowd roared. Evelyn banged her cane on the deck. like a war drum. Mrs. Alvarez shouted, "This deck is stronger than she'll ever be." For the first time, I believed it. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew Karen wouldn't go quietly. She had one last card up her sleeve, and she was just waiting to play it. The morning of the recall vote felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. The air was heavy, even though the sky was a perfect blue. Families trickled toward the community center, some clutching ballots, others holding hands like they were headed into battle. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a long table where the ballot box sat, locked and waiting. Volunteers, we trusted neighbors. Not Karen's cronies checked names off a list. Every slip of paper that slid into the box landed with a dull thunk that made my chest tighten. Karen sat at the front of the room in her usual sharp blazer, gavel within arm's reach. She wore her polished smile, but her eyes were darting, counting every head. The room was full. Earl in his baseball cap, Evelyn with her cane, Mrs. Alvarez clutching her grandson's hand, the Thompsons with their little boy bouncing on his dad's knee. When my turn came, I walked forward, ballot in hand. Karen's eyes locked on me, cold and sharp. I folded the paper slowly, dropped it in, and let it hit the bottom of the box with a satisfying thud. On my way back to my seat, Earl muttered, "Sounded like freedom to me." When the last ballot was cast, the volunteers carried the box to the side table. The room fell silent, so quiet you could hear the scrape of pencils and the shuffling of papers. Diane squeezed my hand tight, her knuckles white. Evelyn leaned forward, so far I thought she might topple right out of her chair. Finally, the head counter stood. Votes in favor of recall 89. Votes against 21. For half a heartbeat, silence. Then the room erupted. Clapping. Cheers. Stomping feet. Evelyn pounded her cane like a drum. Earl whooped so loud the windows rattled. And Mrs. Alvarez cried into her grandson's hair. The gavel cracked down hard. Karen stood, face red, voice sharp as glass. "This is illegitimate. You're tearing apart the community. You'll all regret this." But no one listened. The roar of victory drowned her out. She stormed out, heels snapping against the tile like gunfire. The door slammed behind her, and for the first time in years, Cedar Hills felt light again. Neighbors hugged each other. Evelyn clung to me, whispering, "You saved us." But I shook my head. We saved each other. That night, my deck overflowed with people. Kids ran around with sparklers. Neighbors brought pies and cider, and laughter rolled through the air. The boards creaked under the weight of so many feet. But like always, they held strong. Earl raised his thermos high. Here's to the deck that took down a tyrant. The crowd cheered. Lanterns swayed. The roses along the railing glowed faint in the night. But even as I smiled, binder heavy under my arm, I knew Karen wasn't finished. A woman like that doesn't disappear without a fight. And I was right. The week after the recall should have been a victory lap. Cedar Hills was buzzing with relief. Wind chimes rang without fear of citations. Kids climbed the Thompsons' treehouse again. And Mrs. Alvarez replanted her flower boxes with twice as many blooms just to prove a point. But deep down, I knew Karen. Losing the presidency wasn't the end. It was the start of her nastiest tricks. The first strike came by mail. A thick envelope. Hand-delivered by a deputy. Mr. Johnson, you've been served. Inside was a lawsuit. Karen was suing me personally for defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She claimed I ruined her reputation, cost her income, and of course, demanded the demolition of my deck. Diane read it twice before tossing it on the table. Emotional distress. She fined George for a rocking chair. Still, seeing my name on court papers turned my stomach. I called my friend Nate, an attorney. He flipped through the packet, chuckled, and said, "This is a textbook slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. Judges hate these." Sure enough, the judge dismissed it in under 10 minutes. But when Karen left that courtroom, she gave me a look so venomous it sent a chill straight through me. The next strike came at night, around midnight. Our motion light snapped on. The camera caught two hooded figures creeping onto my deck. One carried a cordless saw, the other a crowbar. They managed to scar a railing post before bolting when the light flared. Earl and I pulled the footage from his deer cam. The license plate belonged to a contractor Karen had hired last spring for compliance inspections. Deputy Collins arrested them. Karen denied knowing anything. Of course, but no one in Cedar Hills bought it. Meanwhile, the new interim board dug into the books. What they found made people's jaws drop. Tens of thousands of dollars funneled into consulting fees for Karen's cousin. Legal retainers for phantom attorneys. Even HOA credit card charges for high-end handbags. All while she mailed us fines for garden hoses and porch swings. At the next meeting, Carla, now acting board chair, projected the numbers. Gasps filled the room. She fined me for a tomato plant. Mrs. Alvarez shouted. Meanwhile, she's buying purses with our dues. Carla's voice was steady. We've already forwarded this to the county prosecutor. The cheer that followed nearly lifted the roof. But Karen wasn't done. The night before Thanksgiving, Earl came pounding on my door, marked down by the retention pond. Now. We ran with flashlights. The chain securing the pond's overflow gate had been cut clean through. Water was rushing where it shouldn't, threatening to flood yards along the creek. Deputy Collins shook his head as he examined the cut. This wasn't kids messing around. This was deliberate sabotage. Diane grabbed my arm. She'd risk flooding homes, families, just to get back at us. I looked at the water foaming against the banks, my fists clenching. She's desperate. And desperate people are dangerous. But the thing about desperate moves, they usually backfire. Because with every petty fine, every smear, every act of vandalism, Karen wasn't weakening us. She was hardening us. Cedar Hills wasn't afraid anymore. We were ready. December rolled in, cold and sharp. But Cedar Hills felt warmer than it had in years. After the sabotage at the pond, you'd think folks would be shaken. Instead, it did the opposite. It lit a fire. People were done being afraid of Karen and her clipboard army. Carla, now chair of the interim board, called a special meeting, not at the community center Karen once ruled. But right there on my deck, we strung lights along the railings, bundled in coats, and brought folding chairs. The boards creaked under the weight of half the neighborhood. But like always, they held. Diane set out mugs of cider, Earl grilled sausages, and Mrs. Alvarez handed out cookies shaped like little fences. Carla stood at the top step. "This deck behind Mark isn't just lumber," she said, voice clear in the frosty air. "It's proof that when we stand together, no bully can tear us down. I make a motion to declare it a Cedar Hills heritage landmark." The cheer that erupted was deafening. Evelyn thumped her cane like a drum. Earl bellowed, "Long live the deck," and folks laughed. But their eyes were shining. From that night forward, everything changed. The board stopped using dues as weapons and started using them for neighbors. They launched the Community Care Fund, fixing George's broken porch steps, repairing the Thompsons' treehouse roof, even buying Evelyn a brand new mailbox to replace the one Karen once called non-compliant. Instead of fear, there was pride. Instead of uniformity, there was character. And folks noticed. Driveways were full of laughter again. Lanterns glowed late into the night. Cedar Hills finally breathed. But the story didn't stay within our fences. Letters poured in from all over. A man in Ohio wrote, "They tried to tear down my grandfather's tool shed. After hearing about your deck, I'm fighting back." A family in Texas sent a photo of their kids holding a banner, "We stand with Cedar Hills." Even a retired couple from Maine wrote, "They fined us for a clothesline. You gave us courage to say no." One night, I sat at the kitchen table, reading those letters aloud. Diane put her hand over mine and whispered, "Mark, your dad thought he built a deck. He didn't know he built a beacon." I swallowed hard. She was right. To celebrate, the new board launched the first annual Cedar Hills Winter Walk. Neighbors decorated porches, fences, and decks with lanterns and ribbons. Some painted murals on plywood. Others lit up trees. Families strolled house to house, sipping cider, kids laughing in the cold air. And at the end of the walk, my deck. Neighbors gathered around it, lanterns glowing, the plaque glinting in the light. Kids sat on the steps munching cookies. Evelyn posed beside the railing. Earl raised his thermos and shouted, "To the deck that stood taller than fear." The roar that followed shook the cold night sky. I stood back for a moment, watching it all. The roses Diane had planted years ago curled against the boards, brittle but alive. The plaque on the railing gleamed steady. The boards under our feet scarred, weathered, but strong, felt like part of something bigger than me. Karen wanted this deck gone. Instead, it became the heart of a neighborhood. And for the first time, I realized she couldn't win. Not here. Not anymore. By January, it wasn't just Cedar Hills talking about our deck anymore. It was everywhere. The local paper ran a piece titled, "The Deck That Wouldn't Fall." Then, the regional news picked it up. Before long, television vans were parked outside the neighborhood entrance, their satellite dishes spinning like vultures. At first, I didn't want any part of it. I'm just a history teacher, not some crusader. But Diane squeezed my hand and said, "Mark, this isn't about you. It's about everyone who thinks they're powerless. Show them they're not. So I stood on the deck. Karen once tried to erase. Cameras rolling. Neighbors gathered and told our story about the fines, the fear, the recall. About the night the whole neighborhood stood shoulder to shoulder under the lanterns. And about how this old deck wasn't just wood, but memory. The clip went viral. Thousands of comments poured in, folks from every corner of the country. A man from Kansas wrote, "They made me take down my chicken coop. Thought I was crazy for fighting it until I saw your story." A woman in Arizona shared, "They banned our garden boxes. We're organizing now. Thank you." Cedar Hills. One community in Oregon even sent a photo, a crowd of neighbors standing around their own weathered gazebo, holding a banner that read, "Stand like Cedar Hills." Reading those messages late at night, binder still thick with Karen's old letters beside me, I felt something shift. Our fight wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to anyone who ever had a memory threatened by a rule book. Invitations started rolling in. One Saturday, I drove 2 towns over to speak at a community hall. Their HOA had banned porch swings, claiming they were visual clutter. Folks were fed up, but scared. I held up my binder and said, "They can write letters and fines, but they can't take what you won't give." By the end of the night, that neighborhood voted to recall their board. Driving home, Diane turned to me, her eyes shining. "Your dad's deck is toppling bullies you've never even met." Back home, Cedar Hills was thriving. The new board's heritage committee turned violations into celebrations. Evelyn's wind chimes hung proudly at the park gazebo. Mrs. Alvarez's flower boxes, officially registered as a community garden. Earl's shed, painted by neighborhood kids, now called the Shed of Many Colors. Everything Karen tried to erase was now stitched into the identity of our neighborhood. That summer, we held the first Cedar Hills Deck Festival. Every home opened its porch or deck to visitors. Live music floated through the streets. Families grilled burgers. Kids painted fence posts with handprints. And at sunset, everyone gathered at my deck for the finale. Lanterns swayed. Roses bloomed. And laughter filled the air. Carla climbed onto a step with a microphone. This deck should have been torn down. Instead, it became a symbol. And let it remind us all, home isn't about compliance, it's about community. The crowd roared. Evelyn cried. Earl slapped my back so hard I almost spilled my cider. And Noah, my youngest, rang a cowbell someone had brought, just to make the moment louder. But the part that floored me most, a family from out-of-state Missouri showed up with their 2 kids. They drove 7 hours just to stand on that deck. The mom touched the railing, looked at me, and whispered, "We wanted them to see what it means to stand up." My throat closed. My dad's old boards, hammered down by calloused hands in 1999, had become something far bigger than he or I could have dreamed. Karen tried to erase this deck. Instead, it turned into a beacon. And the fight wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to everyone who refused to bow. By the following fall, Cedar Hills had settled into something it hadn't been in years. Peace. Kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac without glancing over their shoulders for a clipboard. Neighbors swapped vegetables over fences instead of grumbling about fines. The air just felt lighter. Karen had packed up and left months earlier, moved out under cover of night. Rumors said, no farewell party. No goodbyes. Just silence, and a for sale sign that neighbors passed with relief. But her shadow left behind something she didn't intend: unity. In October, the state's historical commission came out to Cedar Hills. They'd read about the deck and wanted to see it themselves. A month later, I got the letter. My dad's deck was officially recognized as a local heritage landmark. The dedication day was crisp and bright. Families bundled in jackets. Kids waved homemade signs. And the board unveiled a plaque bolted into the railing. Harper Johnson Family Deck. Built 1990. Preserved as a symbol of community spirit. The cheer that followed rattled windows. Evelyn wept into her scarf. Earl threw his cap in the air and bellowed, "Long live the deck, Mrs." Alvarez hugged her grandson tight, whispering, "See, we're stronger together." That night, the crowd drifted home. Lanterns still glowing across porches. I sat on the deck alone, running my hand over the scarred wood. Diane came out, wrapped in a blanket, and sat beside me. "Your dad would be proud," she said softly. I swallowed hard. He built this deck to hold burgers and birthday cakes. Never thought it'd hold a neighborhood together. She leaned against me, and for a while, we just listened to the night, the swing creaking, the faint hum of wind chimes, the sound of life carrying on. And here's what I've learned. Bullies with clipboards will always exist. They hide behind bylaws, behind aesthetics, behind promises of higher property values. But those things can't measure memories, or family, or the way a place becomes part of who you are. Karen tried to erase that. She failed. Because when neighbors stand together, no gavel, no fine, no glossy flyer can break them. So, I'll leave you with the same question I've been asked again and again since all this started. If your HOA told you to tear down the place where your family's history lives, your fence, your deck, your porch, would you fold or would you stand? Shaky but stubborn until the storm passed. Me, I chose to stand. And every creak of this deck, every rose blooming along its rail, whispers the answer I'll carry to my last breath. Stand